I couldn't believe what I saw. My flashlight beam trembled violently in my hand. It cut through the suffocating darkness of the hospital corridor. The light illuminated something that defied all logic. It simply shouldn't have been there. A grotesque impossibility manifested before my eyes. It was a nightmare given horrifying form. A figure impossibly tall and gaunt stood at the far end of the hallway. Its silhouette was a terrifying contrast against the faint, dust-filtered light from a distant window. It seemed to drink the light, leaving a deeper void in its wake. This was a black hole in the building's fabric, a tear in reality. Its limbs were like stretched wire, unnaturally elongated and spindly. They ended in sharp claw-like points. These points seemed to scrape against reality itself, tearing at the air. Invisible rents appeared in the space around it. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. This was a grotesque curiosity, as if observing us. It dissected our fear with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. This intelligence spoke of eons of patient waiting, of countless victims. It wasn't merely a shadow. It was an absence, a gaping void in the shape of a man. It actively absorbed all light, all sound, all hope. It pulled the very essence from the air around it. A chilling vacuum pressed in on my eardrums. It was a painful, deafening silence that screamed of emptiness. The air around it grew impossibly cold. A biting, unnatural chill sucked the warmth directly from my skin. My teeth chattered uncontrollably despite the humid summer night. This cold reached into my very bones, freezing the marrow and turning my blood to ice. A faint, metallic tang, like old blood and ozone, filled my nostrils. It intensified as I stared. The scent pricked at the back of my throat, making me want to gag. It tasted of something ancient, unholy, alien, and deeply wrong. My breath hitched, caught in my chest. A primal scream threatened to tear from my lungs, but no sound escaped. My vocal cords felt frozen solid, trapped by sheer terror, by the entity's very presence. My mind reeled. I frantically searched for a rational explanation. A trick of light? A hallucination? A desperate figment of imagination? Anything but this impossible truth. But my eyes, wide and fixed, refused to look away. I was drawn by a horrifying fascination, a morbid curiosity. It felt like a betrayal of my own survival instinct, a dark impulse to understand. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to flee, to escape this waking nightmare. But I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot. I was a deer in headlights, utterly helpless. And then it moved. With slow, deliberate grace, more terrifying than any sudden lunge, it glided. Its movement defied friction and gravity, as if through thick, unseen water. It took a single, silent step towards us. Its form grew infinitesimally more defined with each terrifying inch. It solidified from nightmare into undeniable reality. This horror was no longer confined to the shadows. It was stepping out into our world. The summer of '96 was a blur of sun-drenched days and restless nights, the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer like a mirage and the air hang heavy with the cloying scent of cut grass and distant bushfires, a suffocating blanket that even the evening breeze couldn't quite dispel. It was a time of small-town monotony, where every day felt the same, a relentless cycle of sun-drenched boredom and aimless evenings spent cruising the same streets, listening to the same grunge anthems on crackling car radios, dreaming of a life beyond the town limits. For me, Mark, and Sarah, it was the summer of desperate craving for something more, something to break the endless cycle of suburban NY, something to prove we weren't just another set of kids waiting for life to happen, waiting for our turn to escape the confines of our sleepy town. We were 17, fresh out of high school, teetering on the precarious edge of adulthood, feeling utterly invincible and convinced the world held no real surprises that we couldn't conquer with a bit of youthful arrogance and a healthy dose of skepticism. We were armed with a beat-up Ford Falcon that smelled perpetually of stale chips and petrol, its suspension groaning mournfully with every pothole, a symbol of our freedom and recklessness. We carried a handful of disposable cameras ready to capture our daring exploits. Each click, a defiant statement against the mundane, a record of our rebellion, and Mark's father's bulky, state-of-the-art for '96 camcorder, a prized possession that felt like a professional film crew's equipment in our amateur hands, a shield of technology against the unknown, a way to document and thus control the unpredictable, to bring the fantastic back to our mundane lives, to make it real. We had an insatiable appetite for anything that promised a rush, a story, something to break the monotony of small-town life, to make us feel truly alive, truly significant, to give us something to talk about beyond school gossip and future plans. Our target, the old Blackwood General Hospital, a sprawling, derelict complex on the dusty outskirts of town, partially obscured by a dense thicket of eucalyptus trees and thorny scrub that seemed to actively reclaim the land, pulling the abandoned structure back into the wild, as if trying to bury its secrets to erase its history. It had been abandoned since '88, a casualty of sudden budget cuts, dwindling rural populations, and, more ominously, whispers of a particularly nasty influenza outbreak that had swept through the region, overwhelming its wards, leading to a sudden, almost panicked closure, leaving patients and staff alike in a desperate, chaotic scramble. Some say never truly escaping its walls, their souls trapped within its decaying embrace, forever bound to its suffering. Locals said it was haunted, of course, a place where the sick never truly left, their suffering imprinted on the very stone, their final breaths still echoing in the empty rooms, a permanent stain on the building's soul, a reservoir of despair, a monument to forgotten pain and lingering agony. But we just saw it as the ultimate urban playground, a crumbling monument to a forgotten era, ripe for exploration, for a few good scares, and bragging rights that would last us through the summer. We believed in concrete, in rust, in the tangible decay of time, not ghosts. We believed in the thrill of trespassing, the adrenaline of being somewhere forbidden, not the chilling, insidious grip of the supernatural. We were utterly, terrifyingly wrong. Our initial foray was exactly what we'd expected from a forgotten place, a dusty, decaying time capsule preserved by neglect, where every object told a silent story of lives interrupted, of pain endured, of hope extinguished. The rusted iron gate, half swallowed by overgrown lantana and thorny weeds that clawed at its ancient metal, groaned a protest like an ancient beast disturbed from its slumber as we pushed it open. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the midday quiet, seeming to reverberate through the very foundations of the building, a metallic shriek that raised the fine hairs on my arms and sent a shiver down my spine. The hospital building itself was a sprawling, brutalist block, its once white concrete now stained with mildew and streaked with rust, like weeping wounds across its facade, as if the building itself was bleeding, slowly and eternally. Its windows, dark and empty, resembled vacant, unseeing eyes staring out from under heavy brows of ivy that clung to the facade like grasping fingers, trying to pull it back into the earth, to consume it. The main entrance doors, heavy and splintered, hung ajar, revealing a cavernous, dark reception area, the front desk still littered with fallen ceiling tiles, shattered glass, and a thick layer of dust that coated everything like a morbid blanket, muffling every sound, absorbing all light. The air inside was heavy, thick with the smell of mildew, decaying plaster, and something faintly antiseptic that lingered like a ghost of its former purpose. A cloying sweetness beneath the dust that made the back of your throat ache, a taste of forgotten sickness and despair, a scent that seemed to cling to our clothes, refusing to be shaken off, permeating our very skin. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating the slow, quiet decomposition, the inexorable march of time, each particle a tiny, glittering reminder of the years that had passed since life had last thrived here, since hope had last entered its doors. Peeling paint curled from the walls like dead skin, revealing older, faded layers beneath, hints of institutional greens and creams, sickly yellows and pale blues, a palette of forgotten suffering that seemed to seep from the very walls, staining them with invisible anguish. Overturned gurneys lay scattered in the corridors, silent witnesses to forgotten emergencies, their cracked vinyl seats and rusty wheels telling tales of frantic movement, of lives rushing in and out, of desperate measures taken and failed, of last moments. Empty patient rooms lined the halls, each a small, desolate box, some with beds still bolted to the floor, their mattresses long gone, leaving only the stained springs, like skeletal remains of former occupants, forever bound to their last resting place. Others had overturned bedside tables, broken lamps, and the occasional discarded slipper or crumpled tissue, hinting at the abruptness of their occupant's departure, as if they had simply vanished mid-sentence, leaving their last moments frozen in time, waiting for someone to find them, to acknowledge their existence. We navigated through the labyrinthine halls, our flashlights cutting through the gloom like hesitant swords, illuminating rusted medical equipment, shattered glass from broken windows, and yellowed patient files scattered like forgotten memories across cracked linoleum floors. Each file was a small tragedy, a life reduced to faded ink and brittle paper, a name and a diagnosis, a story abruptly ended, a life cut short, a silent scream. Mark, ever the daredevil, filmed everything on his father's bulky camcorder, narrating with a theatrical flair, his voice echoing slightly in the vast emptiness, a forced cheerfulness that already felt out of place, a desperate attempt to maintain normalcy in the face of encroaching strangeness. And here, ladies and gentlemen, we have the infamous Ward C, where the truly unwell were kept. Beware, for restless spirits may yet roam these halls. He'd pan dramatically across empty rooms, his shadow stretching monstrously on the walls, a fleeting giant in the decay, oblivious to the real giants lurking just beyond his lens. Sarah, the quiet observer, snapped photos with her disposable, meticulously capturing the grim beauty of decay, the way the light fell on a broken bed frame, or the intricate patterns of mold on a forgotten ceiling tile. She was always looking for the perfect, haunting shot, finding art in the desolation, unknowingly documenting something far more sinister than mere abandonment. We found the old children's ward, eerily quiet, with faded cartoon murals on the walls, smiling suns and whimsical animals, now faded and peeling, their cheerful colors mocking the desolation, and a single deflated balloon, gray with dust, tangled in a bare light fixture, swaying almost imperceptibly in the still air, as if moved by an unseen breath, a child's last toy, a silent, lingering presence. It was unsettling, yes, but it was the kind of unsettling that made us feel brave, like we were conquering a forgotten piece of history, proving our mettle against childish fears, against the silly ghost stories we'd grown up with. We were just kids playing at being explorers, convinced we were immune to the old legends, that our youthful skepticism was an impenetrable shield against anything truly sinister. We spent nearly 2 hours just exploring the ground floor, our initial excitement still high, our laughter echoing a little too loudly in the vast empty spaces, bouncing off the walls like rubber balls, only to be swallowed by the silence, leaving an uncomfortable void. But then the atmosphere began to subtly shift. The playful bravado started to curdle into genuine unease, a cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach, tightening with every passing minute, a premonition of dread that settled deep in my bones, a creeping certainty that we were no longer alone, no longer safe. The silence, initially a comforting blanket of abandonment, started to feel oppressive. It was too deep, too absolute, a vacuum that seemed to swallow every sound, every whisper, every breath, leaving a ringing emptiness in our ears that pressed in on our eardrums, a painful pressure as if the air itself was being sucked away. The distant chirping of cicadas from outside, once a constant, comforting drone, seemed to vanish the deeper we went, as if the hospital itself was actively absorbing all external noise, sealing us within its decaying embrace, cutting us off from the living world, from any connection to sanity or safety, from time itself, trapping us in its endless present. The beam of my flashlight felt strangely heavy, almost sluggish, as if pushing against an unseen current, and our own hushed conversations seemed to lose their echo, swallowed by the suffocating quiet, dying almost immediately after leaving our lips, leaving us feeling isolated even from each other, adrift in a sea of dread. We'd hear faint, almost imperceptible creaks from empty rooms we just passed, sounds that seemed to follow us, or the soft drip, drip, drip of water that wasn't there when we investigated. A sound that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves, a phantom leak, a constant, maddening rhythm that tapped against our nerves. A cruel, mocking metronome counting down to something terrible. A faint, cloying scent, like old, wilting flowers mixed with something metallic and sickly sweet, would drift past, then vanish as quickly as it came, leaving us sniffing the air, confused, a taste of something foul on our tongues, something unnatural, something that defied explanation, a scent that hinted at decay far deeper than mere rust. "Just the building settling," Mark would say, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced, a nervous edge creeping into his forced bravado, his eyes darting around frantically, betraying his unease, his attempts at reassurance falling flat. Sarah, usually so composed, started clutching her camera tighter, her eyes darting into the deeper shadows, her movements becoming more hesitant, her shoulders hunched, as if trying to make herself smaller, to disappear from something unseen, something that was watching. We found ourselves whispering even when there was no need, our voices barely audible, as if afraid to disturb something that was listening, something that had been waiting patiently for us, for our fear to ripen, for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Then things started happening that I truly couldn't explain, things that chipped away at our rational minds, leaving raw, exposed nerves, pulling us into a reality we couldn't comprehend, a reality far darker than any ghost story we'd ever heard. Mark's camcorder, which had been recording flawlessly for hours, began to glitch. Not just static, that might be explained by old wiring, but brief, violent, distorted flashes of what looked like old handwritten medical charts, then impossible blurred faces, gaunt, hollow-eyed, contorted in silent screams of agony, superimposed over the live feed. It would last only a fraction of a second, a blink and you'll miss it horror, just enough to make us question if we'd seen anything at all, before returning to normal, leaving behind a lingering image burned onto our retinas, a phantom afterimage of suffering that seemed to imprint itself directly onto our minds. Mark would frown, rewind, play it back, only for the anomaly to be gone, replaced by perfectly normal footage of a dusty corridor. He'd curse, convinced it was a faulty tape or a dying battery, but the battery indicator remained full, stubbornly mocking his attempts at logic, mocking him, stripping away his last vestiges of control, making him doubt his own senses. Once, while filming a particularly dark doorway, the camcorder's tiny screen briefly showed a perfectly clear image of a child's worn teddy bear sitting on a rusted bed frame, its button eyes staring out blankly, a silent sentinel, only for the live view to show the bed frame completely empty, covered in dust, as if the teddy bear had never been there, as if it had been a cruel illusion just for the camera. Mark rewound, played it back, and the teddy bear was gone. He just stared at the screen, his jaw slack, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. Did you see that?" He'd whisper, his voice barely a breath, his eyes wide with a dawning horror that reflected my own. My own disposable camera, which I'd used to capture a picture of a rusted IV stand in a particularly dark corner, developed the film to show the IV stand exactly as I'd seen it, but in the background, perfectly clear, was a black and white image of a woman in a nurse's uniform, her face obscured by shadow, standing directly behind it. Her posture was stiff, almost unnaturally rigid, and the shadow across her face seemed to deepen into an inky void where her features should have been. A featureless abyss that seemed to stare directly into my soul, a profound emptiness that threatened to consume me. Her uniform was crisp, impossibly clean against the decay of the room, as if she had just stepped out of a time warp, untouched by the dust and grime, a stark contrast that screamed of wrongness, of a presence that defied the passage of time. I hadn't seen her when I took the photo. The corner had been empty, just dust and rust. The image sent a cold shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the hospital's pervasive chill. It was a stark, undeniable presence that defied logic, a silent accusation, a terrifying proof that we were not alone, that something was actively with us, observing us, waiting. Later, another photo I took in the old morgue, meant to capture the cold, steel tables, showed a faint, translucent handprint on one of the surfaces. A handprint that wasn't there when I took the picture, and certainly wasn't mine. It was too small, too delicate, like a child's, pressed firmly into the cold metal as if reaching out from beyond, a desperate plea or a silent warning. Sarah's Walkman, which she'd brought for comfort, its headphones a familiar barrier against the world, a personal sanctuary of sound, a small piece of normalcy in the chaos, suddenly blasted a burst of ear-splitting static, followed by what sounded like a garbled, distorted voice whispering, get out, get humming." The fever, the cold, they're waiting for the next one. Don't let him take you. Before dying completely, its batteries still full, the play button jammed, the cassette tape mangled inside as if violently ripped by an unseen force, its plastic casing cracked. Sarah dropped it as if burned, her face ashen, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own, a raw, primal fear that transcended youthful bravado, leaving her utterly vulnerable, stripped of her defenses. We tried to rationalize it. Faulty equipment, old film, electromagnetic interference, a dying battery in the Walkman, even though it showed full. But the unease was a cold, creeping dread, settling deep in our bones, eroding our carefully constructed composure, dissolving our skepticism like acid, leaving us exposed. It was like a single off-key note in a familiar melody, slowly twisting it into something dissonant, something profoundly wrong, something that whispered of a truth beyond understanding, a truth we were being forced to confront, whether we wanted to or not, a truth that was actively hunting us. We started checking over our shoulders, our eyes darting into every shadow, convinced we were being watched, that every creak and groan of the building was a deliberate sound, a warning, a pursuit, a slow, methodical closing in. We found ourselves huddled closer, our shoulders brushing, seeking comfort in each other's presence, but even that felt fragile, easily broken, a thin shield against an unseen enemy that seemed to permeate the very air to breathe down our necks. The whispers began then. They weren't from us or from the building settling. They were faint at first, like dry leaves skittering across linoleum or the rustle of old paper just at the periphery of hearing, a soft, almost imperceptible rustle, like someone breathing too close, just out of sight, a cold breath on the back of my neck that raised goosebumps. Then they grew, forming fragmented, guttural sounds, always just out of focus, like a radio station struggling for reception, or a voice speaking from underwater, or from deep within our own skulls, a chorus of unseen entities clamoring for our attention, demanding to be heard, a low, incessant murmur that seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the floor, from the empty air itself. It wasn't human. It was a chorus of agony, of profound emptiness, of something ancient and hungry. It was a language of pure despair, and it was swirling around us, growing louder, more insistent, more demanding, a swirling vortex of torment. Help us, lost, cold, never leave. He sees you. He waits. Join us. Join the quiet, the pain, the endless night. You're next. He's so hungry. He wants your memories, your light. The words were indistinct, overlapping, A cacophony of suffering that clawed at the edges of our sanity, a symphony of the damned, of those who had been consumed, their voices a desperate, chilling invitation to join them in their eternal torment. Sometimes I swore I could hear my own name drawn out and chilling. Mark, Sarah, my name. It was a seductive, terrifying lure, promising a cessation of the gnawing anxiety that was beginning to consume us, a false peace in surrender, a final, profound oblivion. It felt like a terrible secret, a dark initiation, a gift I never wanted, a burden that would forever bind me to this place. As we stumbled through the decaying wards trying to find our way back to the entrance, the whispers intensified, becoming a tangible pressure against our eardrums, a physical assault that made our heads throb, a relentless pounding. They seemed to press in on us, a physical weight, a suffocating presence, stealing the very air from our lungs, making each breath a struggle, each gasp a desperate plea. The shadows around us stretched and writhed, taking on impossible, fleeting shapes, dancing just beyond the reach of our direct gaze, mimicking grotesque figures. Gaunt nurses with hollow eyes and skeletal hands reaching out, contorted patients thrashing in unseen restraints, elongated predatory forms that seemed to glide just out of sight, always just behind us, always closer. We heard things fall upstairs, heavy objects crashing with a deafening boom that shook the floor beneath our feet, sending tremors up our legs, followed by a dragging sound, slow and deliberate, coming closer, closer, as if something immense was being pulled across the concrete floor above us, scraping against the debris, a sound that vibrated through the soles of our shoes and up into our very bones, a sound that promised an imminent encounter, an unavoidable confrontation. Mark kept trying to get his camcorder working, but it only crackled with static, and the lens seemed perpetually aimed at distorted, impossible forms that weren't there to our naked eye. A constant flickering reminder of what we were experiencing, a window into a reality we couldn't comprehend, a reality that was now bleeding into our own, irrevocably pulling us deeper into its nightmare. Sarah's Walkman remained dead, a chilling silence that was somehow worse than the static, a symbol of our broken connection to the outside world, a final severance from anything familiar or safe, leaving us utterly exposed, utterly alone in the heart of the horror. Then Sarah screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound, stripped of all reason, all humanity, a sound that tore through the oppressive silence like a jagged blade, echoing off the high ceilings, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. She was pointing down a corridor we had just passed, where a gurney lay overturned, its wheels rusted solid, a forgotten relic of human suffering. Slowly, impossibly, with a deliberate, agonizing slowness that seemed to stretch time itself, making every second an eternity, a single doctor's scrub top, perfectly folded, pristine white against the grime and decay of the floor, slid off the gurney and landed on the floor with a soft, unsettling thump. There was no breeze, no vibration, nothing to explain it. It was as if an invisible hand had simply set it down, a deliberate, calculated gesture, a calling card, a chilling invitation to join the collection, a mockery of our presence. But it was the coldness, the profound, draining chill that emanated from that spot. A cold that felt ancient and malevolent, a cold that seemed to suck the very life from the air, from our very beings, that made us flee. It was a cold that seeped into our very bones, stealing the breath from our lungs, leaving us gasping, our chests burning, our vision tunneling, the world narrowing to that one terrifying point, that one impossible, pristine white cloth against the gray, a beacon of pure wrongness, a symbol of the horror that had claimed this place. We burst through the main doors, gasping into the humid night air, the blessed, familiar scent of cut grass, a sudden shock to our senses, a desperate anchor to reality. But the screams weren't behind us anymore. They were coming from inside Mark, as his eyes rolled back and his body began to convulse violently, his limbs jerking uncontrollably, a puppet on invisible strings, his mouth opening in a silent, impossible shriek that was already too late, a soundless agony that tore at my very soul, a horrifying tableau under the fading twilight. The Ford Falcon, once our symbol of freedom, now felt miles away, an unreachable sanctuary, a distant dream. I fumbled for the keys, my hands slick with sweat, my vision blurring at the edges, the world spinning. Mark's body thrashed against the cracked asphalt, his head slamming back, his eyes, wide and vacant, seemed to look through me, not at me, as if he were seeing something I couldn't, something that was now consuming him from within, taking root in his very being. A faint, almost imperceptible hum began to emanate from him, a low, resonant vibration that I recognized from inside the hospital, a sound that made my teeth ache, a sound that resonated deep in my own skull. It was the hum of the building, the hum of the whispers, the hum of the void, now transferred to him. Sarah was screaming now, a high-pitched, desperate sound, pulling at my arm, begging me to move, to do something, anything, her nails digging into my skin. But I was frozen, mesmerized by the horror unfolding before me, that by the undeniable truth that Blackwood General Hospital hadn't just been an abandoned building. It had been a trap, a living, malevolent entity. And Mark, my best friend, was the first to be fully claimed, his transformation a horrifying testament to its power. His skin seemed to grow taut, his features subtly distorting, elongating, a faint, sickly gray beginning to creep across his face, spreading like a disease. The air around him shimmered, as if the very fabric of reality was warping, bending to accommodate the impossible. I could feel the cold radiating from him, the same cold that had permeated the hospital's deepest corridors, a profound, draining chill. The whispers, now a deafening roar in my mind, seemed to emanate directly from his convulsing form. 1,000 tormented voices screaming for release, for more, for new companions. Join us, Elias, join the quiet, become one, become nothing, become Blackwood, become the hum, become the void. I finally tore my gaze away, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, the taste of bile in my mouth, the metallic tang of fear. I had to get Sarah out. I had to escape. But even as I pulled her towards the car, my legs heavy, my mind screaming, I knew. We had walked into Blackwood General Hospital as 3 friends, full of naive bravado, convinced of our invincibility. Only 2 of us would walk out, and neither of us would ever truly be the same again. The hospital had left its mark, a chilling, indelible stain on our minds, a piece of its endless night that had followed us into the fading light of summer and would follow us forever, a permanent scar on our souls. And as I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so violently I almost missed, the last thing I heard, before the engine finally caught with a roar that momentarily drowned out the world, was Mark's silent shriek, joined by a new, faint whisper just at the edge of hearing, calling my name, promising that Blackwood still had plans for me, that my time would come. The drive home was a blur of terrified silence, punctuated only by Sarah's choked sobs and my own ragged, desperate breaths. The inside of the Falcon felt too small, too vulnerable, as if the oppressive atmosphere of the hospital had somehow clung to us, seeping into the upholstery, permeating the very air we breathed. Every shadow cast by the passing streetlights seemed to writhe, every distant sound on the highway twisted into a phantom whisper, a mocking echo of the voices we'd heard. I kept glancing at Mark in the rearview mirror, but he was unnervingly still now, slumped against the back seat, his eyes closed, his face a waxy, unnatural pallor, the faint gray tinge on his skin having deepened into a sickly, almost translucent hue. The subtle distortion of his features was more pronounced, his jawline too sharp, his cheekbones too prominent. He looked less like Mark and more like a poorly rendered copy, a mask of his former self, a hollowed-out effigy. His breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, and the hum, that low, resonant vibration, still emanated from him, a constant, chilling reminder of what had happened, a parasitic frequency, now living within him, growing stronger. When we finally pulled into Sarah's driveway, the familiar suburban street felt alien, too bright, too normal, a jarring contrast to the darkness we had just escaped. Her parents' porch light seemed to mock the darkness we carried within us, its warm glow doing nothing to dispel the cold dread. Sarah practically fell out of the car, scrambling away from Mark, away from me, as if we were both infected, contagious with the horror. She didn't say goodbye, didn't even look back, just stumbled towards her front door, her shoulders shaking, glancing back with wide, terrified eyes that held a mixture of fear and accusation. A silent question. Why him? Why not you? I watched her disappear inside, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a judgment, leaving me utterly alone with Mark, with the chilling truth. I couldn't bring myself to drive him home, not like this. Not when I knew what was inside him, what had claimed him. I drove to a secluded spot overlooking the town, the same place we used to go to watch the stars and dream of escaping, of our futures. Now the stars seemed cold and indifferent, their distant light offering no comfort, and escape felt impossible, a cruel joke. Mark remained motionless in the back seat, a silent, terrifying passenger. I tried desperately to convince myself it was just shock, a severe panic attack, a psychological break, anything to cling to sanity. But the cold radiating from him, the faint hum, the way his features seemed to subtly shift and settle into a more rigid, almost skeletal cast, defying any rational explanation, shattered those desperate attempts. I reached back, my hand trembling, and touched his neck. His skin was ice cold, colder than a corpse, yet he was still breathing, still subtly humming, a faint, steady vibration against my fingertips. His pulse was a faint, thready beat, barely there, a ghost of a heartbeat. I spent the rest of the night in that car, watching the sun rise, painting the sky with colors that felt obscene after the darkness we had witnessed, a mockery of beauty. Mark didn't stir. When the first rays of sunlight hit him, his skin seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, the gray tint intensifying, his form seeming to deepen, to become more opaque, more there. I knew then, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my soul, that Mark wasn't coming back. Not the Mark I knew. He was a vessel now, a shell, a new part of Blackwood General Hospital's collection, a permanent resident. The whispers in my head, though fainter than inside the building, were still there, a low, insidious murmur, a constant presence that never truly left, a new soundtrack to my life. They seemed to echo Mark's silent shriek, a chorus of triumphant, ancient voices celebrating a new acquisition. One of us, the quiet, the endless night, he belongs to us now. I eventually drove Mark's car back to his house, parking it neatly in the driveway as if nothing was wrong, as if he had just fallen asleep. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. I just left him there, a silent, still figure in the back seat, a chilling secret that would haunt me forever. I walked home in a daze, the humid morning air feeling strangely heavy, the sounds of birdsong jarringly loud, almost painful. My own house felt alien, the familiar comfort replaced by a pervasive sense of dread, as if the walls themselves were watching me. Every shadow seemed to stretch too long. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like the hospital settling, like something was moving just out of sight. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, and for a terrifying moment my eyes seemed too wide, too haunted. A flicker of that same featureless void I'd seen in the nurse's photo, a horrifying glimpse of what I might become. We never spoke about Blackwood General Hospital again, not really. Not about the whispers or the vanishing objects or the things on Mark's camcorder that he later claimed were just static when his parents asked about it, their faces etched with concern. We tried to laugh it off, blame exhaustion, old wiring, our imaginations, the heat, anything to avoid the truth, anything to maintain the fragile illusion of normalcy. But something shifted that night, something fundamental within us, a piece of our very essence left behind in those decaying halls. Sarah eventually got rid of her Walkman, claiming it was faulty. though I saw her glance at it sometimes, a flicker of fear in her eyes, a haunted look that never quite left her, a permanent shadow that clung to her like a shroud. She started sleeping with a nightlight and refused to be in a room alone after dark, her once vibrant spirit dimmed. Mark's camcorder sat in his closet, untouched, a silent testament to the footage he could never show anyone, a burden he carried alone, a secret that gnawed at him, slowly consuming him from the inside out. He stopped talking about urban exploration, his bravado replaced by a quiet, almost fearful introspection, a profound emptiness behind his eyes that mirrored the void. And me? I still wake up sometimes, years later, convinced I can hear faint, dry whispers just at the edge of my hearing, a low, insistent murmur that calls my name, promising a quiet I don't want to find. And for a split second, I see the shadows in the corner of my room stretched just a little too long, a little too thin, mimicking grotesque figures, a chilling reminder of the things that happened there. Things that I still, to this day, can't explain. The hospital had left its mark, a chilling, indelible stain on our minds, a piece of its endless night that had followed us into the fading light of summer and would follow us forever, a permanent scar on our souls, a silent, living horror.